Good morning, everyone. Thank you for your participation. My name is Byung-Hwa Director of UNITAR Jeju International Training Center located in this area. It's a great pleasure to serve as a moderator for the session on the harmony in the digital age, exploring AI-powered path to peace building. As you are very well aware, throughout 2023 and until now, we have witnessed several protracted conflicts and unrest around the world. The Davos Forum last year identified rebuilding trust as its overarching theme, emphasizing global cooperation to address global challenges with the help of innovative approaches such as artificial intelligence. AI's role in various sectors has recently gained prominence worldwide. However, discussions on its potential deployment in addressing conflicts remain insufficient. In this regard, it would be valuable to share stories about the effective utilization of AI technology for the peace-building efforts. So I'm very pleased to be with the esteemed speakers and discussants who will share their expertise on the dynamics of AI technology and the global peace-building efforts. Before I give floor to our speakers and the panelists, let me briefly describe how the session will be run. We are given 90 minutes for the whole session, 2 presentations for 15 minutes each, and the comments and the questions by 3 discussions for 10 minutes, respectively. Afterwards, presenters will respond to the questions posed by discussants. And there will be questions from the audience which will be answered by presenters and the discussants. Now I would like to briefly introduce our distinguished experts. Our first presenter to my left is Ms. Abhishan Bodunut. I don't know whether I correctly pronounce your name. Chief of the Information Management Unit at the UN Department of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs and Peace Operations in New York. Over 13 years of experience in using data and new technologies within the UN's peace and security sector, she has played a key role in shaping the UN Secretary General's data strategy and worked on various peacekeeping-related initiatives. Dr. Vasily Kitsios, to the left, who is our second presenter, is a senior research scientist at the Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organization in Australia. As an expert in data-driven methods for improved climate simulation and forecasting, he is currently leading cross-disciplinary projects, developing machine learning techniques for the rapid assessment of climate risk and forecasting climate-amplified food security-induced conflict. Professor Jeong-Jun Lee, to his left, is the first discussant who is currently serving as a professor at Gyeonggi University's School of Management. He has focused his research on the intersection of big data and artificial intelligence within the field of management. He has held the position of director at Gyeonggi University's Big Data Research Center since 2014. Mr. Myung-Shin Kim, who is our second discussant, currently serves as the Principal Policy Officer at LG AI Research, responsible for AI ethics and public policy. He developed the AI risk management process and the AI ethical impact assessment tools. He also has contributed to global and national AI ethics standards by initiating and co-authoring the LG Accountability Report on AI ethics and establishing a partnership between LG AI Research and UNESCO. Dr. Matthew Griffin, who is our final discussant, is currently serving as an assistant professor at Busan National University. His research and teaching covers various areas including cognitive science, AI, Western and non-Western history, politics, and ethics. With over 50 publications, his work has appeared in top journals such as Sciences, Phenomenology, and Cognitive Sciences. Without further ado, I would like to invite Ms. Bonut to the floor for our first presentation. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. It's a true pleasure and honor to be here together with you, distinguished guests and distinguished panelists. Within the next 15 minutes, I'm going to present an overview of how we've been harnessing AI within peace and security pillar of the United Nations. I'm going to start by highlighting the UN 2.0's vision from Secretary General Antonio Guterres, which was published by his office last September, with a focus for the United Nations to strengthen its expertise and culture in data, digital, innovation, foresight, and behavior science, to build a UN system that can better support member states and implement its mandates, and of course, implementation of sustainable development goals. So the focus of UN 2.0, as we call it, Quintet of Change, is very much focused on internal transformation of United Nations by incorporating digital, data, innovation, foresight, and behavior science skill set to strengthen our skill set so that we can better serve the world and the planet based on our mandate. So UN 2.0 is the vision of Secretary General, not just for peace and security, but across UN agencies, funds, and programs. And of course, with UN 2.0, the idea is that we create a United Nations that is agile, nimble, responsive, and can use the technology of 21st century to tackle some of the world's biggest challenges within 21st century. So of course, AI is part of this discussion. As you all know, artificial intelligence has been around since the 50s. So it was a field that was introduced in 1956. And later on in 1997, there was machine learning, a subset of AI that was introduced that created a leapfrogging in the area of AI. In 2012, it was deep learning that was introduced. And in 2021, as you all know, with the launch of ChatGPT, there's been a huge change in the way that we've been all using AI. So what we are seeing now is that in the past, we've been using AI in peace and security pillar. And I'm going to show you two examples. And maybe I call these two examples more of traditional AI. One example is understanding local perceptions. So local perceptions are absolutely important for the work that we do in peace and security pillar. We need to understand how we interact with local population, how our beneficiaries feel about our deployments. How do they feel about a peace agreement that is in place? So it's often a resource-intensive process. We need to make sure that we engage with local population from across the parts of the society, from different gender, from different age group, to understand their feeling about a peace agreement. So in order to do so, we need to use resources. And it's often expensive. We often within the UN don't have those resources. So in certain scenarios, we have been using natural language processing as a way to do collective digital dialogue. So in order to do so, we've set up an online discussion forum with a link inviting participants from across the society, from different parts of the conflict, from different age groups, different genders, and then the experts and moderators and peace builders start asking questions in local languages using natural language processing. We do real-time analysis of the responses that we receive from across the board. And then, based on the responses that's received, the reports are analyzed, and the information is then shared with those who are responsible for participation in peace processes. Often the case is that people who are doing these peace processes are maybe from the elites. I mean, we get that criticism that it might not be always fully representative of the society. But with doing this type of activities and exercises, we ensure that we collect the responses we need from different parts of society so that those experts who are engaging in peace process have a full understanding of what's going on between different parts of the society. Another example that I want to show is the use of satellite imagery. The example here that you see is from our mission in South Sudan. It's called UNMISS. It's a peacekeeping mission that's been there for a long time. And in 2013, when the conflict was escalated, there was a huge impact and threat on local population. So what we saw was that there was a huge number of people that were internally displaced. So with satellite imagery, we analyzed where the internally displaced population were located over time on a daily basis so that we could provide them the protection they needed by our peacekeepers. So satellite imagery can also be used for analyzing impact of war, impact of conflict on different settlements across the world, or looking at impact of climate change on different areas, looking at ceasefire violation by analyzing satellite imagery. And in order to do so, of course, machine learning algorithms are used with image recognition capabilities. So one thing I want to highlight here is that these two examples, which are, I'm going to call them traditional AI, requires expertise, requires computational powers, and it was mainly done by a group of experts. But now one thing that we are seeing with generative AI is that generative AI is revolutionizing the accessibility and democratization of AI by enabling more individuals and more organizations without that deep expertise in computer science, data science to be able to use AI. And that's why we see that Gen AI brings in potential for us in peace operations, in peace and security pillar of the UN to enhance our operations. I'm going to provide some examples that we think generative AI, if used responsibly, and I'm going to highlight again, if it's used responsibly, it can have an impact on the way we do our operations. First one is operational efficiency. It's with use of generative AI, we are able to automate some of the daily administrative tasks, logistic tasks that take so much time from individuals. So our experts often have to spend time doing some administrative processes, and we believe by using Gen AI, we can free their time to automate some of those processes so they can work on more strategic tasks. We believe with generative AI, we can do better data analysis and reporting by improving the speed of data collection, by enhancing the accuracy, by finding anomalies in data. We can better assess damage from conflicts, and we can assess the impact on civilian and local population. Language translation is one area that we see there's going to be a huge impact. As many of you know, we have peacekeepers coming from 125 countries across the world that are deployed in areas where they don't speak the language. And that often has been a challenge in order to create a communication bridge between local population and our peacekeepers who are protecting their lives. We believe with generative AI there is a potential to enhance communication between member states and areas and populations that we support and we protect. Another area is capacity building. With AI-enabled training tools, there is a possibility to create one-on-one tutor-based learning platforms so that peacekeepers can get the exact learning skill set that they need to be able to tackle some of the challenges that they face with. Of course, I want to highlight that it's data that fuels AI. And it's really important that we pay very careful attention to the data and the information that we use to train the AI models. We consider information and data the lifeblood of the UN. We've been over 70 years using information in different shapes and form to inform our policy making, to inform our operations. And it's absolutely important, it's always been important for us to use impartial, unbiased, accurate, reliable data for our operation. And this is still the case in the world of AI. I want to highlight a source, a website that my team manages. It's called Peace and Security Data Hub, psdata.un.org, that is accessible to all of you. That's an effort for us to ensure that we share reliable, highly accurate, and impartial, unbiased data on peace and security with public, with member states, and with academia and research center. This data that is declassified based on a very clear governance model is shared with public to increase transparency, but also to show the impact of the work that we are doing between UN Peace and Security pillar. And I highly recommend you, students, researchers, member states, and public to access Peace and Security Data Hub for your analysis and let us know what you think. Because we believe in order to have unbiased AI, we need to have data that is accurate, unbiased, and reliable. And I want to highlight that in UN Secretariat, we use a measured approach that encourages ethical, responsible, and mandate-led use of AI tools. We have a set of rules that, for example, Secretary General's Bulletin on Information Sensitivity, Classification, and Handling. We adhere to all these rules to ensure that the information that we share does not put lives of individuals at the risk. We also ensure that the information that we are sharing is not sensitive. It's not harming member states' reputation or the organization's reputation. Last summer in UN Secretariat, we had a set of guardrails in the use of publicly available generative AI tools in terms of how we use these tools responsibly and ethically. And right in March this year, we finally got a Secretary General Bulletin on data privacy and protection, which highlights the importance of protection of personally identifiable information in the work that we are doing with implementation of Sustainable Development Goals and beyond. And I want to highlight that UN is, as you mentioned earlier in my first slide, Secretary General is pushing the UN to digitally transform. So UN is very much open to leveraging technology advancements in alignment with UN values and human rights. We need to make sure, though, that this information is used responsibly with the right guardrails so that we can harness the potential of technology to better serve people and planets. And the way that we intend to use generative AI, same as AI and other technologies that we've used in the past, is to encourage an ethical, responsible, and mandate-led use of AI tools, with keeping humans in the loop and fully accountable for the use of generative AI tools. And I want to conclude and end by saying that none of the technologies, none of the generative AI tools would ever replace the sacrifices of our peacekeepers who are working in some of the most difficult parts of the world, some of the most challenging parts of the world. Thank you very much. I stop here, and I'm very much looking forward to the discussions and the questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your enlightening presentation on the successful projects the UN is currently prioritizing for peace building through AI technology. Now I'd like to invite our second presenter, Dr. Kisios. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Okay. Right, I'd like to thank everyone for the invitation to speak here. It's an honour. And I'd also like to acknowledge the funding and support from the CSIRO Julius Career Award and Responsible Innovation Future Science Platform funding this research. So regional conflicts are all diverse. They have different root causes, different historical contexts, but they potentially have one thing in common, in that the climate has the ability perhaps to exacerbate existing tensions and unrest. The goal of this project is to use machine learning and publicly available open data sets to determine the significance of this climate influence. Our longer-term vision is to use such ML models in conjunction with latest climate forecasts to develop an early warning system for climate-amplified conflict in the hope to better inform near-term response and longer-term policy making. To understand the possibilities and limitations of such an approach, I'm going to first present the motivating case study, the Arab Spring, an introduction to climate science modelling and prediction, and then the data sets and methods required to evaluate plausible mechanisms of how the climate may influence conflict. So the Arab Spring, for those of you that aren't aware, was a political uprising that started in Tunisia at the end of 2010. It then spread to the neighbouring countries of Libya, Egypt, Yemen, Syria and Bahrain. Arguably, the conflict in Egypt was amplified due to a supply-driven bread price inflation, And this was brought on by drought-induced wheat yield reductions in nations that export wheat to the Middle East. So Egypt has never been able to produce enough wheat to match its demand locally, so it's always had to import wheat from other nations. So this is a classic example of the climate not influencing conflict directly in the country of interest, but rather indirectly through its nations it requires key commodities from. We've made some progress on using various machine learning approaches to model the links in this chain of influence from, does this work? Here we go. From carbon emissions to the climate response, from the climate response to agricultural production, to how the supply of these crops key to food security influences market trade and international market prices, how these international prices flow down into local food price inflation, and then finally how all of these inputs potentially influence the local conflict and social unrest. So before we get into that though, I thought for those of you that aren't perhaps as familiar, I thought I'd provide an introduction to climate modelling. So conceptually, the climate is driven by the dynamics, the chemistry and the biology of the atmosphere, land and sea ice. The system is driven by solar radiation from the sun, which is then absorbed, scattered and reflected throughout the atmosphere and ocean. The natural and man-made carbon emissions exacerbate the radiative forcing through the greenhouse effect. So mathematically, the way this is represented is through solving a series of partial differential equations that govern the conservation of mass. So that just means you can't create or destroy mass, the conservation of momentum, the conservation of energy, and scalar transport. And scalar transport is how the various gases are moved around the atmosphere, how salinity and salt and various biological species moved around the ocean, and how humidity is transported around the atmosphere. Now, that is for all intents and purposes the truth. Unfortunately, there's no analytical solution to this that we can write down nicely with a piece of pen and paper. So we need to approximate the solution on a numerical grid, which we use high-performance computing to solve for us. And that's what we refer to as a general circulation model or a climate model. So the way that this looks is we subdivide the atmosphere into a series of cubes. So you might see the grey, wrong button again. The grey boxes there. Each of these boxes in the horizontal direction is 100 kilometres in the latitudinal direction by 100 kilometres in the longitudinal direction. That's pretty much all that we can afford to do in a reasonable amount of time. But unfortunately, there's a lot more going on that's smaller than 100 kilometres by 100 kilometres. And that's what this diagram kind of represents. So on the horizontal axis, we have the scale or the size of the physical phenomena. On the vertical axis, we've got the time scale or the lifetime of this phenomena, if you like. So in the bottom left-hand corner, we've got atmospheric turbulence, which at the smaller scale is a millimetre in diameter and is born and dies within a second. At the other extreme, we have planetary waves, which are waves that wrap around the entire Earth, which have lifetimes in the order of months. In the ocean, likewise, we have phenomena that's small and fast, and all the way through to much larger objects, size of the entire planet, that are much slower. So the key thing to take away from this diagram is that small things are fast, big things are slow. So if you want to forecast anything over months or years into the future, the only thing that we really have the ability to forecast are the large things. So these grey ovals here for completeness, they're the coupled phenomena such as the seasonal cycle, the El Niño, La Niña Southern Oscillation, and the global impacts of climate change. So if you recall, I was saying previously that the climate models are only able to resolve certain scales. So that's what this vertical dashed line here represents. Everything to the right of that exists in a climate model, and you can see in the data. Everything to the right is not resolved. So to put this into further context, I've overlaid this with the scales in which we live, if you like. So continents, they're all clearly resolved. You can see the continent outlines in the climate model. Many countries are explicitly resolved, but many countries are smaller than 100 kilometres by 100 kilometres and live inside a grid box, so we don't actually see them. And certainly no cities or villages are explicitly resolved in the climate model. So I'd suggest if we're aiming to forecast and learn the influence that climate has on conflict, it's not realistic to expect, at least with a standard climate model, that we are going to be able to do that at a city and village level. There are ways to increase the spatial resolution of these climate model outputs. At a local level, it requires a lot more computational resources and is typically not done globally. So since I guess the focus of this work is to, in an unbiased way, look at the influence of conflict globally, we're going to restrict ourselves to country-level aggregated statistics of how many conflicts occurred in this nation over a period of months. So it's just kind of describe the problem that we're tackling. So that's the climate data. The conflict data is also very complex in its own way. There are various conflicts data sets. Conflicts are characterised in different ways. Some are human curated. Others, like Phoenix, use natural language processing to associate conflicts with various countries from news articles. One thing they all have in common, though, they're all date stamped, so we know what time the conflicts occurred. Some statistics about the number of people that unfortunately died. Also the country that it occurred in, and a latitude, longitudinal location. So we're able to produce videos like this that you're seeing on the screen. Okay, so that's the conflict data. So we've spoken about the climate data on the left, the conflict data on the right, but there are also many other potential inputs that could influence the exacerbation of a conflict, including national macroeconomic and political data sets, national agriculture, global commodity markets, and international trade. So we've incorporated all of these various data sets, all freely publicly available. One annoying thing from my perspective is that many of the data sets use different words for the same country. So that was just a data cleaning exercise that we had to go through. But now that we've done that, we've got the ability to produce diagrams like this. This is an Egypt-specific one, but we can produce such a set of plots for all of the nations. So on the top left, we've got some time series illustrating the temperature on a monthly and also an annual basis, and the rainfall in blue. The grey box in all of these plots, that's the period that historians are associating with the Arab Spring. On the top left, we've got measures of production and the net imports required by Egypt over this period. The World Bank Global Market Price, it's the middle plot. Interestingly, the price of these commodities spiked during the global financial crisis in 2008. That was actually higher then than during the Arab Spring. But when you scale this price by the level of imports required, the trade bill was actually larger during the Arab Spring, despite the price being lower. And then we have the NELDA election date data sets marked by the blue dots. These are the elections in Egypt over the previous so many years, and measures of autocracy and democracy of each of the nations. And then finally, in the bottom right, we've got the various conflict data sets, the number of conflicts in that particular month in this particular country, and that's what we're trying to forecast or predict on the basis of all of the other time series. So just some kind of takeaway points. During the Arab Spring, there was arguably a high annual temperature during that period, at the beginning of the Arab Spring. The wheat imports in Egypt were increased to fill a production shortfall, or more correctly, wheat production plateaued, but the population of Egypt kept increasing, so they needed to increase their wheat imports. I mentioned before about the GFC. And then at the bottom, all of the conflicts illustrating an increase at the beginning of the Arab Spring, as historians have identified. So now that we have this clean data, relatively clean data set illustrated for Egypt, we're now going to identify or try to build a model relevant for all countries in our ability to try and forecast the growth and the number of conflicts in the following month. One important thing to consider is that climate and climate impacts are what we call a small data problem, with relatively few relevant samples compared to the complexity of the system. So this is the opposite of a big data problem. Vision recognition, for example, is a classical big data problem. Just think of how many photos of cats and pianos and cats playing pianos we have on the internet and on YouTube. So there's lots of data to learn a big complicated model. That's not what we have in climate, and it's even worse in climate-induced conflict. So this requires purpose-built machine learning methods that are sufficiently complex, but no more so, no more complex than required. So the results you'll see here on this screen, we've essentially split the data into two. We've built the model on the basis of the historical past data, and then tested its ability to forecast the next month. And then we shift 1 month, repeat the process, shift 1 month, repeat the process. And so we have an array of model inputs. We've looked at average temperature over each nation, average rainfall, the trade bill, monthly fixed effects, levels of democracy and autocracy, inflation, whether an election occurred in that month or not, and subsets thereof. And we've also tested whether information of the conflict 1 month ago was also important 2 months ago and 3 months ago and 4 months ago and 5 months ago and 6 months ago. And on the basis of the current data set, we've identified that knowledge of the conflict up to 5 months ago and the temperature in the following month and the trade bill in the following month are useful in improving our forecast of conflict in the next month. So to wrap up, whilst conflicts have their own unique origins, existing tensions can potentially be exacerbated by the climate. Given certain elements of the climate are predictable over certain timescales, it may then be possible to forecast the influence of climate on conflict. So there are many existing climate forecasting systems which can provide the relevant inputs, for example, nation average temperatures or rainfall if necessary. And then these would be inputs into an ML model of climate amplified conflict. Today we provided some preliminary evidence that the climate may either directly influence or directly exacerbate conflicts through temperature or indirectly through trade bill effects. But we still need to determine if knowledge of the future climate is useful in forecasting the onset of such events. So today I've really spoken about, does climate exacerbate an existing conflict, not whether the climate can trigger a conflict. That's potentially a much harder problem. And if I may, just to wrap up, we're really working toward like an end-to-end solution of how the climate can trigger conflict through each of these mechanisms. It's not just me working on it. We have a diverse team of really talented people working on various elements that are required. The methods, the climate-dependent agriculture, socio-economic interactions, and agricultural commodity market prices. So I might just leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your insightful presentation on the role of climate change in accelerating the Arab Spring. Now, I would like to invite 3 discussants to make comments or ask questions for further discussion. Professor Kyung-Jun Lee, could you share your thoughts on the presentations?
Good morning. My name is Kyung-Jun Lee, not Kyung-Jun Lee, professor of Kyung University. Today I speak with my prepared manuscript. Avishan Botnut presented on the use of AI in peacekeeping and promotion. She explained how advances in AI technology, particularly generative AI, can promote access to technology and democratization, enabling international organizations like the UN to maximize efficiency in areas such as administration, logistics, data analytics, and real-time translation, and allocate more resources to strategic work. And Dr. Vasily Kissios introduced how climate change impacts on food security and social unrest can be analyzed and modeled to predict future conflicts. His research interprets the mechanisms by which climate change causes food price inflation and how this fuels international conflict. He also explained how these predictions can help policymakers respond more quickly and effectively, thereby contributing to maintaining global peace and stability. As such, rather than being a threat to humanity, artificial intelligence is more likely to be a tool to solve our problems. And as the cost of AI continues to decrease and its performance continues to improve, it will be and should be democratized. AI should be used to reduce rather than amplify disparities in society, and there are many technologies such as federated learning that reduce disparities while increasing collaboration between people in society. Generative AI technologies will not only contribute to the creation of content such as text, images, music, sound, and video, but will also help people around the world meet each other, match economic actors to create transactions and reduce transaction costs, stimulate the economy, reduce inventories, and improve the quality of consumption. AI will play the role that the internet used to play, and in the process, the bloated so-called platform economy will be replaced by an AI agent economy. Rather than legislation or government intervention, AI will be better regulated by AI-armed agents in the private sector and society. Legislatures and administrations will need to thoughtfully design and evolve institutions and enforce policies to ensure that this ecosystem of AI agents is healthy. AI's ability to analyze and make decisions quickly will encourage the use of AI in politics and policy. As explained today, we need to connect our policies to AI to detect the need for policy change, automate the enforcement of policy measures, and keep them under government and citizen scrutiny. Citizens should be empowered to monitor and influence policy areas of interest to them with the help of AI agents. In educating future generations, governments should educate them to utilize AI well in their economic lives and strengthen their political and policy participation as citizens. Governments should reform their national laboratories into AI-first laboratories to solve humanity's most pressing problems using AI technology. As Cicero in Melbourne, solving problems of a public nature should be an international endeavor. Google and AAAI, the Association for Advancement of Artificial Intelligence, the former American Association for the Artificial Intelligence, are already working to solve social problems with AI through special projects and tracks such as AI for social good and AI for social impact. The Korean government is making similar efforts. These efforts need to be more organized and internationally coordinated. For example, preventing money laundering requires international cooperation and active policy measures by policy authorities domestically and technologically. Techniques such as federated learning can be used to elicit voluntary cooperation from financial institutions and countries. In order to develop AI systems based on machine learning, we need data. And now that we have confirmed the performance of AI, we need to redesign the data supply system to be sustainable and democratic. We need to imagine systems and organizations that do not reinforce the monopoly of data and the monopoly of AI. There may be a need for a global system of data banks where individuals, businesses, and government organizations can store their data in privacy. Just as the capitalist system based on market economy and democracy has been mutually developed with institutions and organizations such as banks, I believe that the AI system can be developed through new institutions and organizations such as data banks. Data banks should evolve into systems that securely store the data of social entities while utilizing federated learning technology to develop artificial intelligence without moving the data, which can then be used to develop socially useful artificial intelligence, and the companies that develop the AI can distribute a portion of the value, profit created to the data owners. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Lee, for sharing your insights on how AI should be utilized, highlighting concepts such as AI agent economy, AI armed agents, AI first laboratories, and the democratic redesign of data supply. Now I would like to invite our next panelist, Mr. Myung-shin Kim. Floor is yours.
Thank you. My name is Myung-shin Kim. I'm currently in charge of AI ethics at LGI Research. First of all, I thank you for inviting me to this meaningful discussion. Before joining LGI Research, I used to work for Korean National Commission for UNESCO and joined the entire process of developing UNESCO recommendation on the ethics of AI as part of Korean delegation. So today I'd like to share my thought incorporating my experience from private sector as well as international organization. About 20 years ago, I served as UN peacekeeper in Timor-Leste, known as East Timor. At the time, during my military service, I had to collect local information and write the situation report every day, which requires lots of time and efforts. And communication was also often challenging due to language barrier with both local population and other peacekeepers from different countries. Today, I was very glad to learn now AI can assist in data analysis, report writing, language translation, which I believe could significantly enhance the efficiency and effectiveness of peacekeeping activities. As I mentioned before joining LGI Research, I worked for Korean National Commission for UNESCO, and one of my responsibility was to manage a climate change education project. The project was called Asian Rice Project. Rice, with RICE here standing for Regional Initiative for Climate Change Education. The name highlighted the importance of the link between climate change and food security. And one of our goals was to raise awareness of this linkage, which was not easy. But today I was also very pleased to learn how AI can scientifically demonstrate the link between climate change and food-related conflict. And I think which is providing valuable insight for preventing as well as mitigating such conflict. Now I'm in charge of AI ethics at AI LGA Research. The core of my work is to identify and address potential risks that may arise throughout the entire cycle of AI system. This is to ensure that no unethical issue can arise not only in the result of AI technology and services, but also their creating process. Using AI technology in peace building activities, for example, like analyzing and preventing social conflict due to climate change and enhancing effectiveness and efficiency of peace building activities is highly desirable, quite sure. However, we must not overlook the ethical issue that may arise in the process of development and use of AI. It's because I believe adhering to AI ethics is ultimately a part of a peace building process. So in this regard, I have a few questions to both speakers. The first question is both of you. In utilizing AI for peace building, it's very essential to collect rich and high quality data from diverse sources to ensure accuracy and also avoid bias for specific groups or region. But there are some sensitive data that governments are reluctant to disclose, or some personal data of citizens can be very difficult to obtain and must be used carefully even if obtained. So I'm curious the effort you are making to address this challenge, and additionally, if you have established AI ethics impact, AI ethical impact assessment, or kind of like risk management framework. I would appreciate if you could share like what kind of contents or method you have for that. And for Ms. Abisan Bajnut, you mentioned about the accountability. Like using AI technology in peace building process, accountability issue can be arised at any time. So to address this issue, I think you mentioned the UN adopted human in the loop approach, emphasizing human intervention and responsibility when using AI. So I wonder, like, if there is any like a specific example where this approach has led to like better peace building outcomes, and what kind of like method and principles you use when using this approach. And for Dr. Vasily Kichos, very impressive about your research, and I'm just like wondering what is kind of like a main limitation of current climate prediction model, and if there is a kind of like a technological alternative to overcome this challenge, please share about it. And you mentioned about like Arab Spring, but apart from that, if there is any recent climate, is there any like recent conflict directly or indirectly influenced by climate change, or any like region you expect to be affected in the future? Please share about your thought. And lastly, I want to emphasize the importance of education. As Professor Lee mentioned, I think education is very important. Every individual, not only individuals, but like government, corporations, international organizations, they need to enhance their awareness and capability on AI. I think from just my like personal observation, I think AI ethics contents for public and use are increasing, but there is a lack of quality, high quality AI ethics contents for professionals such as AI researchers, developers, and policymakers. So LGI Research, to address this issue, has partnered with UNESCO to develop AI ethics MOOC contents for professionals, and we are planning to release the results by the end of next year. So we need participation and advice from experts and public. So I'm looking forward to the participation of all of you and lots of interest from the public and audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kim, for providing insights on prioritizing impartial and protective AI measures, including AI literacy education and the importance of building AI ethics in the pursuit of AI utilization. First, I would like to ask the final discussion to make presentation. After that, I hope the presenters will answer the questions raised by discussants. Mr. Kripin, please.
Okay, so if you don't mind, I'm just used to standing when I'm talking, so I'm going to stand. But our speakers have talked about really good uses of AI. And I want to talk maybe about some questionable uses, because building peace and prosperity depends on using AI judiciously. And so as an example, I'll consider border crossing, and I'll also look at uses of AI in military conflict. Okay, but one method that's used to vet migrants is systems that read facial expressions. And the idea is they're trying to infer the underlying emotions that people are feeling. And in particular, they're trying to figure out, is the person lying? And what I want you to notice is the question of whether such systems actually work and the question of whether they're fulfilling political goals are very different questions. So there's some policymakers in Europe, I can name countries, I won't, that are perfectly happy to reject, for example, Syrian refugees. And so if you have a system, for example, that identifies 30% of people as lying who aren't, so if you have all these false positives, that will actually fulfill the political objectives of the country, even though the AI system is not working. Now, the second question, of course, is workability. Do these systems do what they're designed to do? And I'm going to argue there's problems. I don't have time to go into all the details, but there's a lot of intellectual, financial capital invested in this. The models that they're using, the basic models come from psychology. They're very kind of simple models, and of course, we're attracted to simplicity. So the basic model holds that there's 6 basic emotions, and you have corresponding universally expressed facial expressions, and these are actually some of the stimuli they've used to kind of test like whether people from different countries will see the same emotions. One thing I want you to note, there's a few things that are odd about these images. One thing I want you to note is I've had people angry at me. I've been marched at gunpoint. I've never had anybody look like that. So that's one point to notice. A second point I'll just let you think about is there something else that's maybe missing from these images? Okay, so take a look at these images and tell me like what emotions do you see? And unless you know the punchline, I'm pretty sure you all see sadness or pain. And if you say you don't, I'm going to say you're lying. But if we blow out these images, we see that they're actually showing something very different than what we would assume when we see the faces in isolation. So at the bottom, for example, we have Justin Bieber fans overwhelmed because they're in the presence of their hero, Justin Bieber. Okay? So context is very important to reading emotions, and these AI systems do not take context into account. Moreover, it's very difficult to kind of get training sets to kind of teach a machine to kind of interpret context like this. A second problem is that, of course, emotional expression is not as universal as people might suppose. So those of you from Korea know a lot of times when women laugh in Korea, the hand will go in front of their mouth. And you know, in other cultures, that might indicate embarrassment, whereas in Korea, it's just people, you know, being happy and laughing, and that's basically it. Okay, so a problem with AI systems is that they can absorb the biases of designers, maybe inputting rules, but also the data that we use to train various systems can also be biased. And so let's look at some more examples. There's a border system, I think in Australia actually, that rejected that man there because it kept on concluding he had his eyes closed when he was trying to cross the border. And so maybe AI systems are not designed as well as they might be to interpret Asian faces. Certain AI platforms register black faces as being more contemptuous than white faces. Okay, this has obvious implications if you're using AI to vet refugees that are crossing borders, since many of these refugees would come from the global south, where on average people have darker skin than I do and much nicer skin, I'll add too. There's also gender bias in AI. So Amazon, for reasons I don't have time to get into, had a CV vetting system, but basically if you were a woman, that was an exclusion criteria. You were rejected from being a good candidate. And there's also can be inclusion of irrelevant factors. So Cal gang in California, you know, if you're wearing a red shirt in a certain context, it will identify you as being a gang suspect. So these are some issues. Okay, so to get into some of the more ethical matters, I think as we have AI systems making more and more decisions for us, there's a danger that we'll offload moral responsibility from humans onto an electronic system. And the problem is if you're not dealing with the weight of it, you know, if an AI system tells you, okay, this person's lying, and I don't think people are going to assume the AI system is wrong. I think they're just going to assume it's right. You'll maybe reject that person without considering the consequences, considering whether the basis upon which you're doing that is really valid. Okay, but as we start using AI in military applications for targeting, it gets maybe even more problematic. So there are jurisdictions that are using AI to select military targets. They're actually quite proud. They're like, in the past, we could come up with 2 targets a day. Now we come up with 100 targets a day. They're claiming to, you know, not to be trying to reduce civilian casualties, but if you look at the numbers, it seems to be quite the contrary. And so here too, we have a situation where you could, when you kind of offload decision making to AI, that I think if people don't feel that they have to kind of bear the moral weight, and if we can just kind of blame AI, supposing AI blows up a school of children, we say, well, the AI did it. It wasn't me. It wasn't my fault. I think this creates significant issues. Okay, so summing up, since the 1950s, as the first speaker talked about, we've had AI, but repeatedly researchers have predicted that AI will soon surpass human beings on all cognitive tasks. This goal has not been achieved. Now, of course, new boundaries are constantly being crossed, amazing things. So in 2016, as people are most likely aware, AlphaGo beat an elite Korean player in Go. That was a big breakthrough. But what we want to notice is that playing Go and playing chess don't translate to general human intelligence. We also might want to note that a non-elite player beat an AI Go system in 2023 by exploiting bugs in the system. And further, we might note that AI performs extremely poorly on games like Stratego, which in human beings are listed from ages 8 and up. Okay, so human beings can handle levels of complexity that AI can't. This is an area of specialization for me. I could go on and on and on about this. Okay, but at the same time, we want to be realistic. Of course, AI can handle certain kinds of complexity that we can't. And I think that our two speakers have nicely illustrated this. And therefore, I think AI, of course, has a central role to play in building a peaceful, more prosperous future. But I think we need to keep human judgment in the equation. And so my questions, which are messy, I'll try to verbally abbreviate them. But the first question, data is the lifeblood of the UN. So I'm kind of curious to know a little more about how the UN ensures that the data sources are unbiased. I'm kind of curious to know the extent to which you worry about biased data, biasing machine learning, or the engineers kind of introducing rules that might create biases. And I'm also kind of interested just with data in general. I mean, when we're looking at things through data, we're looking at things through number. And so what about things that we can't really ascribe numerical values to, or that we can only ascribe numerical values arbitrarily, such as the pain that somebody feels if they're separated from a loved one through conflict, or the joy of reunion, or the resentment that local populations might feel as refugees move into their community. And then my question to you is, I lived through the Arab Spring. I was in Egypt between 2011 and 2017. So it's, and I think, of course, what you're saying is absolutely accurate and good. I would just be interested if you could, talk a little bit about prospects. I know it's not exactly your area, but for weighing overall context, because there's many things that went into the Arab Spring. It was the initial thing was held on Police Day in protest of police brutality, at catalyzing events in Tunisia. Social media played a big role. IMF policy that encouraged certain economic matters played a role, and a variety of other stuff. But I'll stop now because I think I'm probably past my time. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Griffin, for sharing your thoughts on the importance of keeping human judgment in the equation when utilizing AI for building a peaceful future. It looks like all three panelists emphasize the importance of careful use and the design of data and the correct interpretation of data with expanding AI technologies. Now, I would like to invite our presenters and the discussants to respond to the comments and questions raised by our panelists. Please.
Thank you very much for your questions and for the remarks. Mr. Kim, you mentioned AI ethics. First of all, thanks for your service and Timor-Leste mission. That's wonderful to hear that you bring in that experience, and also working on AI ethics, which is an absolutely important aspect of ensuring that we govern AI so that it can be used responsibly for a better world, for a better good of the world. You mentioned AI ethics agreements in UNESCO. Definitely UNESCO has been at the forefront of AI ethics. In November 2021, they came up with the AI ethics agreement. Just a few months ago, at the United Nations General Assembly came up with a resolution, a landmark resolution, focusing on safe, trustworthy, and inclusive use of AI across member states, and more than 120 member states sign off on the resolution, which very much highlights also the cooperation between private sector and public sector to ensure that the member states, governments, NGOs work together with private sector to ensure that AI is designed responsibly and ethically. And of course, last summer, within the Security Council, there was a discussion, there was an open debate on the impact of AI on safety and security in the world. And I'm very much also looking forward to Republic of Korea's presidency at Security Council. That will also include a session on AI, and I'm very much looking forward to that discussion. In terms of methodologies that we use within the UN, of course, we have the Secretary General's bulletins on information security, on the new initiative, the new Secretary General bulletins on data privacy, which highlights the importance of protection of personally identifiable information in data before, of course, training any algorithms. And with that comes a recruitment of a chief data protection officer within Secretary General's office that will be overseeing the ethical use of AI in line with privacy policy. The person, once they're recruited, they will be reporting directly to Secretary General, and they will be working with focal points across different departments. So we believe that once the person is on board, there's going to be a huge impact on the way that us within the United Nations agencies, funds, and program work on personally identifiable information to ensure that the data that we are using for model trainings are unbiased, are ethical, and protect lives of individuals. In terms of a practical tool that I want to really highlight, it's a tool that in 2018 United Nations Global Pulse designed. The tool is called Harms, Risks, Benefits Assessment Toolkit. It's a toolkit developed by United Nations Global Pulse. It's a two-stage assessment checklist in terms of when the project, a data project is initiating. And of course, this includes AI projects. And as Mr. Kim mentioned, that the ethical use of AI has to be incorporated within the life cycle of a data AI project. And with this checklist, it's possible to go through these elements to ensure that the work that's being conducted, from data collection to data processing to data transfer to data analysis to data visualization to model creation and beyond, it's done ethically. For example, transparency. When data is being collected from individuals, it's absolutely important for the individuals to know why and the purpose of this data collection, why that information is being collected. If the data is collected for one purpose, it should not be repurposed for other reasons. So these are all some of the elements that you will see in the checklist, and it's publicly available. I recommend you all to take a look at it as you are also embarking on your initiatives with data collection tools. And of course, with AI, part of the bias might come from the data itself. If the data collection is done in a way that does not include different voices in the society, and I think this kind of goes to your question on keeping human in the loop. I want to give an example. When we want to understand how people feel about an issue, sentiment analysis is widely used in many Western countries because people have access to internet, people have access to social media. But when we want to do a sentiment analysis on issues around conflict-related sexual violence with women and girls, in sub-Saharan Africa, we have a serious challenge because we don't have the infrastructure in place. We are talking about, for example, a city like Kampala in Uganda. Only 20% of women have access to internet. So just imagine if you are using a sentiment analysis, looking at data sets for this type of analysis, your data set is not going to be representative of women and girls in those societies. So it's really important to make sure that you fully look at internet penetration, social media usage, infrastructure, access to information, and digital literacy before conducting this type of analysis. Because you might have the best AI models, best sentiment lexicons, but if your data, underlying data, is biased, your analysis is going to be biased. Your analysis is not going to represent the voices of women and girls in sub-Saharan Africa because they don't have a voice on social media. And this is absolutely important. And how do we keep human in the loop? Here I want to thank the Republic of Korea for providing female peacekeepers. Female peacekeepers have been extremely helpful in working with local populations, with women and girls, with having those dialogues, in-person dialogues, to collect their sentiments, to understand their public opinion, to understand how they feel safe and secure with deployment of peacekeepers. So it's really important to look at the context. I think you mentioned context, Matthew, and context is absolutely important. A sentiment analysis, looking at social media data using AI models, in certain contexts, in certain countries where people, men and women and different parts of society have equal access to social media, can work, but it might not work in other contexts. So it's really important to keep the context in mind as we are working and developing these algorithms. And the one thing I want to highlight here, Matthew mentioned our concerns about bias in AI. It's absolutely right. We are very much concerned. Because if AI is developed by certain people in Silicon Valley who do not understand the challenges of the world, who have not been exposed to these challenges, there's going to be a huge risk. And here I want to highlight Secretary General's initiative on establishment of an AI advisory board, which is a diverse group of experts coming from different parts, private sector, governments, who are working together to ensure that the AI is designed in a way that is unbiased, that is ethical, that's responsible. And this report will be shared with private sector to ensure the ethical use of AI. But one thing I want to highlight is that we know that bias is an unavoidable factor of life. We know bias exists, but it's up to us as human beings to ensure that AI doesn't become an aspect of technologies. It's up to us. This is the time to shape AI so that AI is inclusive and AI doesn't leave anyone else behind. And that's why it's really important for AI teams to be diverse. So when AI teams come together, it needs to be a diverse set of skill set, diverse set of inclusion from the society when AI teams are coming together. And also in terms of your last question, if I may also answer that one at the same time, in terms of relying too much on quantitative analysis, absolutely, there is a risk with that, and especially in the work in the area of peace and security at the United Nations, there's a lot of human nuances that we would not be able to quantify. Within peacekeeping operations, we have a performance assessment tool called CPAS, which focuses on demonstrating the impact of our operations on our mandates and also local population. The set of indicators that are there are a combination of qualitative and quantitative indicators because, as Matthew rightfully mentioned, it's not always possible to boil down certain human nuances into numbers and facts and figures, and we need to focus on qualitative approaches. So we need to look at a very balanced format in terms of how we are doing our analysis so that we incorporate both qualitative and quantitative approaches as we are doing our analysis, as we are doing our performance assessments to fully understand how the local population feel about it. And as part of that is the deployment of female UN peacekeepers who very much help us understand how women and girls feel in these societies where they're often, there's a huge threat against them. So I want to also mention one other element that more and more we are seeing that our missions, our peacekeeping missions are using data visualizations within their Secretary General reports. The last mission that incorporated data visualization is UNIFIL, a mission in South Lebanon, looking at ceasefire violations. And in my unit, one thing that we have done is we have created a set of guidelines, data visualization guidelines, for our peacekeeping missions to ensure that these guidelines are followed when data visualization is being presented within Secretary General's report. And one of that elements is to ensure every bar chart, every data visualization is accompanied by a narrative to ensure that the context is captured. Because data by itself doesn't tell a story. You might interpret that data in so many different ways. If the narrative, if the context behind data is not shown, if it's not demonstrated. So that's why we put together a set of data visualization guidelines to ensure that the data that we are presenting is accompanied by a very clear quantitative narrative to very much provide the context behind the data. I will pause here. I know there are more questions, so thank you again for your excellent questions. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bodnud, for your eloquent answers to questions. You, I think, promoted the activities of United Nations related with the utilization of AI in a very impartial manner. Thank you. Dr. Kisios, any comments? Any answers to the questions raised by discussant?
Thank you, Mr. Kim, for your comments. I picked up a couple of things. I think one of the first issues you raised was on the security of data at a personal level. So I can give an example of a previous project. We looked at the influence of climate on admissions into hospitals, particularly intensive care units. So we were provided data that was at a patient level. So we knew the date that the person arrived, the condition they had, how long they spent in the hospital. But at no stage was any personal details shared with us. We knew their age, their sex, and really there was no need to share anything more than that, and the postcode where they came from. So it's from the developer. I don't think there's really a need to share the level of personal information that some people might be reluctant to share. And secondly, in the type of applications that we work in terms of climate, we end up aggregating to such a level where the individual admissions are irrelevant as well. So we're looking at the number of admissions in a month or in a year. And on that, from my perspective, all of the work in this climate impact space is on learning the response that the human system has to climate. We have many climate forecasts and climate projections that we can later apply a model to, but the real effort is on understanding these relationships and to know that these relationships may not be sufficiently strong for them to be useful to us at all timescales. So in this hospital application, we looked at is there a relationship from day to day in specific hospitals to the local weather? It turns out not a sufficiently strong one, because there are other things going on from day to day. It's the weekend. The specialist is going skiing in Switzerland for a holiday. The plumbing's out, all sorts of things. So it's not until at least in our particular study, until we aggregated over all hospitals in Australia at an annual level that there was a statistically significant relationship. So at that level, you wouldn't say that any personal information has really been deducible. Second, to your point about the limitations of climate models, it's true, they're not perfect. And it also, even if we had a perfect model, there's this thing called limits to predictability. So it's why a weather prediction lasts for at most 2 weeks, right? It's our uncertainty in knowing what the weather is right now. It kind of seems strange, but we actually don't know what the weather is right now because we don't have a sensor over every square millimetre of the globe. So our uncertainty in knowing the now grows to such a stage where in 2 weeks' time, the uncertainty is as large as the weather signal itself. So even if we had a perfect model, there are limits to what is knowable. And as I mentioned in my talk, the larger things are predictable or knowable for a longer amount of time. So if you want to know fine-scale information about local impacts, that's only knowable days to weeks into the future. If you want to say something about months or years into the future, you're really limited to saying things about regional averages, continental averages. So I think that's one general limitation, separate from the limitations in the climate models themselves. And I might also add, one of the important things in all of this is to be honest about our predictions, and part of that is providing uncertainty estimates. So I didn't go into that in the talk today, but it's insufficient to just say, I think the weather tomorrow, I think it's going to rain tomorrow. you need to say, what's my percentage likelihood of there being rain? So we're familiar with these types of forecasts in the weather context, but we should also be providing this type of information in forecasting agricultural production and the likelihood of conflict. So it all has to be probabilistic. We can't be definitive about any of this. And then I think you also asked the question, are there more recent situations like the Arab Spring? I use the Arab Spring as a motivating example because it's one where I think most people can associate the relationships. But in the climate sciences, we refer to this as the attribution problem. This is also an issue in the physical sciences where a lot of media outlets and the general public would like to know, is this bushfire caused by climate change? Or is this tsunami caused by climate change? That's an impossible question to answer. You have to respond to that statistically. You could say, under this level of warming, this particular type of event is X% more likely or less likely. So it's it's really impossible for me to say this, even the Arab Spring. I can't say this is a climate-induced or a climate-amplified scenario. I can just say it's such a percent more likely than had climate not been involved. And we can play those what-if games with these models. We can remove the influence of climate and then predict the amplification or lack thereof of potential for conflict. And what else was there? I think that was it for you. So thank you for your questions. That was great. And Michael, about the generality of conflicts, I agree with your sentiment completely. Yeah, all of these conflicts are horrendously complex. They've got lots of things going on. And to what I spoke before about it being a small data problem, we're never going to be able to capture all of the influences just because of lack of sampling. So I think our best hope is to see if there is common ground between each of these conflicts that we can extract. So do all of these conflicts, do they have a certain amplification associated with temperature or with food availability or affordability? So they're really the questions we're trying to address. Our forecasts aren't going to be perfect. At best, we'll be able to provide some guidance along with appropriate measures of uncertainty. And then it's up to the human to decide what to do with that information. So there's, there will be no ability for a human to say, the AI told me to, because in the end, the human has to decide what the action is given the level of uncertainty. Again, thank you for your questions. I think I've addressed everything. Apologies if I haven't.
Thank you, Dr. Kisios, for your answer to all the questions. I share 100% your thought on that everything is based on scientific analysis. Despite some deficiency or limitation, I think we have to approach the international peace building approach through analytical scientific analysis. Thank you very much. And then I would like to invite the Professor Lee to respond to the question raised by Mr. Kim.
I have questions for each speaker. For the aviation, in a recent report on the usage of AI of people by country, South Korea is under the 20th rank. So it was very shocked. So Korean people do not use generative AI. So why? So my conjecture is that the Korean job market is too rigid. So CEOs and companies have no free right to fire low productive employee. And employee do not have high incentive to work hard. So how do you motivate UN employee to use ChatGPT, generative AI? And another question for Dr. Kisios. Can you introduce a very interesting case for you to predict real conflict? For example, what will be the next month conflict using your system. So
So we have to give the chance for audience to ask questions.
Surely. Dr. Jun, first of all, I mean, since I've been in South Korea, I feel everything has been so efficient and has been working so well. So definitely a very innovative, hardworking nation. In terms of incentives, I want to highlight the fact that AI is not going to replace people. Those who use AI will be replacing people. And with that in mind, we've been trying to ask our staff to just learn, educate themselves with the new technologies. We organize a lot of sessions within my unit. We call them Tech Talk series, which I hope you will all be joining us in the future conversations, to really show why it's important for us to be agile. We live in a world of conflicts, and United Nations is more and more needed in the world we live in. But we really need to show our impact. We need to be working efficiently so that the world trusts us with the conflicts that are going on, with the issues around climate change. So we are very much at the forefront, but of course, there's always the challenges in terms of skill set, data literacy, especially in field missions. That's one area that we are heavily focusing on now to ensure that we educate, we provide enough trainings, and also using AI itself to train our workforce by providing tutor-based one-on-one trainings to ensure that our colleagues in the field are also up to speed with the skill set they need. Thanks for an excellent question.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Lee, for your cheeky question. I'll provide with a cheeky response. And it's good, actually, because I didn't articulate the strongest determinant of a conflict is if there was a conflict in the previous month. So to answer your question, my forecast of what nations will be in conflict next month are those that are in conflict this month. So yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much. Because of time restraint, now I would like to open the floor to the audience. So simultaneous interpretation will be provided. It's okay for you to ask questions in Korean too. Any questions from the audience? Please.
AI 있잖아요. 한국 사람들은 AI 모르잖아요. AI 산업용법을 모르잖아요. 그거 말려줘서 교수님. 이쪽.
네. 그러니까 질문은 한국 분들은 이제 AI 관련해서 잘 모르기 때문에 좀 많이 알려주시면 좋겠다 이런 말씀이실까요?
예.
예, 감사합니다. The question is, even though the AI technology is developing very rapidly, the ordinary people don't have much understanding or knowledge on how it is developed or upgraded. So what kind of measures we have to take to enlighten people about the importance of AI, limitation of AI, something like that?
Sure, thank you so much for your excellent question. So one thing I want to highlight is that it's really up to people to start using some of the publicly available tools like ChatGPT. Now ChatGPT 4 is, so many of those features are now publicly available for free. And I think the best way to start is like learning internet. You know, when internet came in, people started just learning about it because they needed to get work done. And I suggest with publicly available generative AI tools, people also start playing with them, to test them, to use them, not just to see how it can help them, but also to see when the algorithms have hallucinations, when the algorithms are providing wrong information, when it's not accurate, and the risk associated with them. Just one example I want to highlight, if you use ChatGPT and ask it to generate an image of an influential person, it's not going to generate an image of a woman. It's not going to generate an image of an African person. So there are biases with these tools. And it's really important for all of us to start using them to also provide the feedback that your algorithms are actually biased. Your algorithms are having issues. So the way to go about it is just download one of these publicly available tools, Microsoft Bing Chat, ChatGPT, and start playing with it and see how it's going to help you. For me, when I was traveling to Korea, I used ChatGPT for my itinerary to see where I want to go, Jeju Island. I used it for translation with my taxi driver here. So it's been helping and supporting me very much. So I highly recommend you start playing with it. Thank you.
Any additional question from the audience? Okay, over there.
그 인공지능을
Could you
활용하는
identify 소개 본인 학생이신지 좀.
그 대기고등학교에 재학 중인 2학년 학생이라고 합니다.
From high school student in Jeju.
그 인공지능을 활용함에 있어서 해석 가능성이라는 문제는 항상 이제 나중 미래에도 해결할 수 없는 문제라고 생각을 하는데 그 뭐 유엔이나 아니면 인공지능을 만드는 곳에서는 이 해석 가능성의 문제에 대해서 어떻게 대처를 하고 있는지 뭐 예를 들면은 인공지능이 도출한 결과를 전문가들이 다시 해석을 해가지고 어떤 이론을 만드는지 아니면은 해석 가능성을 위해서 또 다른 인공지능을 만들어서 관리를 하는 건지 그런 것들이 좀 궁금합니다.
Thank you very much. I think as far as I know, he asked question about the interpretation of artificial intelligence actually. In order for us to have a better understanding of what's going on through AI technology, the experts are gathering a lot of information. But nonetheless, it is true that there is a limitation of interpretation of the answers provided by AI, artificial intelligence. What could be the measures to have a better understanding or better interpretation of AI's answers to the questions raised by people?
I'm going to take that. It's okay. Thank you for your question. Great to hear you're in high school and attending our session. To answer your question directly, there are secondary tools that people use to build some interpretability into big, complex, big data associated neural networks. They're typically not the types of tools that we use because we're in a small data regime. We have to embed more intuition of the system, and in doing so, we also embed interpretability. So not all AI solutions are non-interpretable. The solutions that we do use are interpretable. And I might also add, also following on from the previous question, if you are interested in AI, it is great, go to all the websites and use ChatGPT and all these things, but I would also suggest stay in school, do fundamental mathematics, go to university, do all the proper units, and be involved in the development of these things if you're really motivated.
Professor Lee?
Yeah, let me explain about the explain of AI recent breakthrough. Last week, the Anthropic, the company of United States, reported a major breakthrough on the interpretability of AI. So, they developed Claude 3. So they experiment that if they say Golden Gate Bridge to Claude 3, then they found some kind of features activating on the users saying Golden Gate Bridge. So they announced the Golden Gate Claude last week. So the AI replied all the answers with the Golden Gate Bridge. It is occupied with the Golden Gate Bridge. So it shows that we can manipulate and we can interpret AI, the very large language models. So that's the very important event that now we can interpret AI. So we do not have to be afraid of AI itself. So AI is not enemy of humankind. Human can be enemy of another human. So last week we have a clue that we can manage AI and we can interpret AI.
Okay, thank you very much. I think because of time restraint, I think it's time for me to wrap up the session. Thank you very much to our presenters and the discussions for their wonderful insights. We learned a lot from their discussion. And thank you very much to the audience for your questions. I think it is true that the importance of AI is expanding as time goes on. That's why Last week in Korea, our Korean government organized the AI summit meeting. The leaders discussed the possibility of the expanding AI technology together with the limitation AI ethics, and there was a ministerial meeting too. So I hope that today's session will be the starting point for you to continue to do research on enhancing your understanding on AI and the limitation of the AI ethics. Thank you very much.
그럼 이것으로 이번 세션을 마치겠습니다.